Chapter 8. "Ah, here you are at last," said the rat idly. "By your reek, we expected you ages ago. Look, Fanger, he has brought the pup." A long nose poked over the first rat's shoulder. It had a friend. "What a tidbit she is," said Fanger in a smooth, rich voice. "I will allow you the entire boy if I may have the sweetness of the pup to myself, Shed." "It is tempting, but he is more bone than meat, and she is such a morsel," said Shed. "I find myself quite torn by your offer. Stand you, boy, and let us better tell your stuffing." The cockroaches had been freaky, the bats intimidating, but these rats were purely terrifying. Sitting back on their haunches, they were a good 6 feet tall, and their legs, arms, whatever you called them, bulged with muscle under their gray fur. But the worst part of all was their teeth, 6-inch incisors that protruded out of their whiskered mouths. No, the worst part was that they were clearly planning to eat Gregor and Boots. Some people thought rats didn't eat people, but Gregor knew better. Even the regular-sized rats back home would attack a person if they were helpless. Rats preyed on babies, old people, the weak, the defenseless. There were stories. The homeless man in the alley, a little boy who'd lost 2 fingers. They were too horrible to think about. Gregor slowly got to his feet, retrieving the torch, but keeping it down at his side. He pressed Boots back against the cavern wall. Fanger's nose quivered. This one had fish for supper. Mushrooms, grain, and just a little bit of leaf. Now that's flavorful, you must admit, Shed. "But the pup has gorged on stewed cow and cream," returned Shed. "Not to mention, she is clearly milk-fed herself." Now Gregor knew what all the fuss about bathing had been. If the rats could detect the handful of greens he'd eaten hours earlier, they must have an unbelievable sense of smell. The Underlanders hadn't been rude when they wanted him to bathe. They'd been trying to keep him alive. He went from attempting to evade them to wishing desperately that they'd find him. He had to hold the rats off. It would give him time. The expression startled him. Vicus had said killing him would give the roaches no time. By time, did the Underlanders simply mean more life? He brushed off his clothes and tried to adopt the rats' casual banter. "Do I have any say in this?" he asked. To his surprise, Fanger and Shed laughed. "He speaks," said Shed. "What a treat! Usually we get nothing but shrieks and whimpers. Tell us, Overlander, what makes you so brave?" "Oh, I'm not brave," said Gregor. "Bet you can smell that." The rats laughed again. "True, your sweat carries much fear, but still you have managed to address us." "Well, I thought you might like to get to know your meal better," said Gregor. "I like him, Shed," howled Fanger. "I like him too," choked Shed. "The humans are commonly most dreary. Say we may keep him, Fanger?" "Oh, Shed, how is that to be? It would entail much explaining, and besides, all this laughter gives me hunger," said Fanger. "And me," said Shed, "but you must agree to eat such amusing prey is a great pity." "A great pity, Shed," said Fanger, "but without remedy. Shall we?" And with that, both rats bared their teeth and moved in on him. Gregor slashed at them with the torch, sending a trail of sparks through the air. He held it in front of him with both hands like a sword, fully illuminating his face. The rats pulled up short. At first he thought they were afraid of the flame, but it was something more. They looked stunned. "Mark you, Shed, his shade," said Fanger in a hushed voice. "I mark it," Fanger said Shed quietly. "And he is but a boy. Think you he is—" "He is not if we kill him," Fanger growled and lunged for Gregor's throat. The first bat came in so silently that neither Greg nor the preoccupied rats saw it. It caught Fanger mid-leap, knocking him off course. Fanger plowed into Shed, and the rats landed in a heap. Instantly they regained their feet and turned on their assailants. Gregor saw Henry, Marith, and Perdita zigzagging their bats above the rats' heads. Besides avoiding one another in limited space, they had to dodge the wicked claws of the rats. Fanger and Shed could easily leap 10 feet in the air, and the sparkling ceiling of the cavern over the beach was not much higher. The humans began to dive at the rats, wielding swords. Fanger and Shed fought back viciously with claws and teeth. Blood began to stain the beach, but Gregor couldn't tell whose it was. "Flee!" Henry shouted at Gregor as he whipped past him. "Flee, Overlander!" Part of him wanted to, badly, but he couldn't. First of all, he had no idea where to go. His boat was high on the beach, and the tunnel, well, he'd rather take his chances in the open than in the tunnel if he had to deal with the rats. More important, he knew the Underlanders were only here because of him. He couldn't just run away and leave them to face the rats. But what could he do? At that moment, Shed caught the wing of Marith's bat in his teeth and hung on. The bat struggled to free itself, but Shed held fast. Perdita came in behind Shed, taking off his ear with one stroke of her sword. Shed gave a howl of pain, releasing Marith's bat. But as Perdita pulled out of her dive, Fanger leaped onto her bat, ripping a chunk of fur off its throat and hurling her to the ground. Perdita hit her head on the cavern wall as she landed and was knocked out. Fanger loomed over her and aimed his teeth at her neck. Gregor didn't remember thinking of his next move. It just happened. One minute he was pressed against the wall, and the next he had jumped forward and thrust his torch into Fanger's face. The rat shrieked and stumbled backward right into Henry's sword. Fanger's lifeless body fell to the ground, taking the sword with it. Fanger's shriek finally woke Boots, who took one look over Gregor's shoulder and began wailing at the top of her lungs. Her cries echoed off the walls, sending Shed into a frenzy and disorienting the bats. "How fly you, Marith?" yelled Henry. "We can hold," cried Marith, although his bat was spraying blood from its wounded wing. Things didn't look good. Marith's bat was losing control. Henry was unarmed. Perdita was unconscious. Her bat was gasping for air on the ground. Boots was screeching, and Shed was insane with pain and fear. Though bleeding badly, he had lost none of his speed or strength. Marith was trying desperately to keep the rat from Perdita. But he was just one guy. Henry flew interference, but he couldn't get in too close without a sword. Gregor crouched over Perdita, holding the torch. It seemed a fragile defense against the crazed Shed, but he had to do something. Then Shed leaped, catching Marith's bat by the feet. The bat slammed into the wall, and so did Marith. The rat turned on Gregor. "Now you die!" screamed Shed. Boots screamed back in terror as Shed lunged at them. Gregor braced himself, but Shed never made it. Instead, the rat let out a gasp and pawed at the blade that jutted through its throat. Gregor caught a glimpse of Luxa's bat, Aurora, flipping upright. He had no idea when she'd arrived. Luxa must have been flying completely upside down when she'd stabbed Shed. Even though Luxa had flattened herself on the bat's back, Aurora barely managed to pull out of the maneuver without scraping her off on the ceiling. Shed slumped back against the cavern wall, but there was no fight left in him. His eyes burned into Gregor's. "Overlander," he gurgled, "we hunt you to the last rat." And with that, he died. Gregor had only a moment to catch his breath before Henry landed beside him. Pushing Gregor out onto the beach, he lifted Perdita in his arms and took off yelling, "Scorch the land!" Blood pouring down his face from a gash on his forehead, Marith was already wrenching the swords from Shed and Fanger. He dragged the rats into the river, and it quickly carried their bodies away. His bat shakily regained the use of its wings, and he hurled onto its back. Marith caught Boots's backpack and hoisted Gregor onto his stomach in front of him. Gregor saw Aurora hook her clawed feet into the fur at the shoulders of Perdita's injured bat. Luxa had at some point retrieved the oil lamp from the boat. As they rose into the air, she smashed it onto the ground. "Drop the torch!" yelled Marith, and Gregor managed to straighten his fingers, releasing it. The last thing he saw as they darted out of the cavern was the beach bursting into flame.